Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the Purple Zone. This is Alexis, and I have a confession to make. I do not read the newspaper at my kitchen table anymore. And that might not feel very confessional to you. It definitely does to me because I consider myself a little old school with some things, or like just kind of nostalgic, holding on to these things that I love or I remember doing. And when I was growing up, I remember getting the daily paper at the house. My parents got two different papers. They got the state one and they got the local city one. And I remember seeing it at the house. And I mean, I mostly like probably just I opened up the comics. That was the thing that I loved when I was a kid. The Family Circle comic or Blondie or Dilbert was one that I remember reading at some point. Calvin and Hobbes was definitely in there too. And then as I got older, especially like into high school, I was noticing things in my local city paper, my local town paper. And I remember hearing my parents talk about things. Those were moments I definitely remember. And I remember thinking when I become an adult, I definitely want to get the newspaper. And I happened to marry someone who also is kind of old school in that way and nostalgic and loved getting the newspaper. And so we did. I remember when we lived in Lewiston, we got the Lewiston Tribune, and I really enjoyed getting the paper and reading it and knowing what was going on in my town. And now that we like live down in the Treasure Valley, I we got the local paper here. And then one morning I woke up and I realized that I had like it was like a realization of noticing that my habits had changed. And I wasn't opening up the paper anymore at the kitchen table. I was opening up my technology and I was accessing I was using my technology, my phone and my computer to get a hold of the local news. I was learning about my town news, the state news, and national news through my cell phone. And all of a sudden, it was this conversation that I had with my husband, which was like, should we really, do we need to keep using this local, like this, not like use the local paper, but have our habits changed? And do we need to then make adjustments to how we're accessing the news? And the realization was, yeah, we do. Uh, and there was some guilt with that. Anyways, my confession just comes with guilt and with this acknowledgement that okay, I'm not getting the hard copy paper anymore. And I'm sure that many of you listening are going, Alexis, so many people are experiencing that. You're not special. And you're right. I'm not special in that way. A lot of people are accessing it through their phones. Stuff has changed over time. But so with that acknowledgement, this morning then I woke up, I accessed the news and I was listening to this person talk about how people maybe don't aren't feeling the difference in our world today when it comes to like political stuff. I mean, I enjoy politics. So he was talking about that. And those moments when you watch something or you hear something and it's oh my gosh, it makes you instantly think about something else. And as I was watching that, I thought about how you probably have heard me say policy is personal. I really do think that. I've like been a school board member. I've watched different things in my state. I've been at the state capitol. Policy does feel very personal. I have seen the impacts of different policy that have been passed, the implementation of it, and how it impacts us personally. And then the next thought that came to my mind was, okay, well, why do I feel that way? What is my origin story that has gotten me to that moment? And now you're learning about how my brain works because then in that moment, I thought, okay, yeah, like, oh my gosh, I love origin stories. I think about the different Marvel movies that have come out, and then they do like the origin stories. I think about the Disney, and like one of my favorite origin stories comes from 101 Dalmatians. I remember watching that like cartoon movie as a kid, that animated movie. I loved it. And then they came out with the origin story of Cruella de Vil. and the movie was Cruella, and I love that movie. I think it's so good. Or even like the Bridgerton series. Now, I watch that. And Queen Charlotte is an origin story. And anyways, there's something about origin stories that I loved. And so the big question today is, have you ever thought about your origin story? The moment that sparked your why in your volunteering, in your community, or, even in something that like is the thing that you care about in your life, your job. It doesn't matter what that is, even though this podcast is about policy practice and people. So for me, the question is like, have you ever thought about your origin story, the moment that sparked your why in your community? So the reality is that policies do shape the way that our communities look and feel, and they've changed a lot over time. So, just kind of setting the tone for this episode today, it's all about me connecting personal stories with public policy because we live public policy every day. It's not abstract, it really does show up in our everyday lives. So, I'm going to share just like a couple of everyday ways that policy shows up. There are a ton, and these were just a couple that I jotted down that just came to my mind, like right as I was reflecting on what I wanted to share. So, one of them definitely, I'm all about education. So, I'm going to say that school funding policies show up in our everyday lives. I'm talking about state versus local property taxes. And that battle impacts the classroom. And that battle, particularly here in Idaho, has been one that has been filled with tension over the decades. Wasn't that long ago, I was sitting across from Senator Risch in his office in Washington, D.C. And as we were talking about national funding and how that was going to be impacting Idaho, he shared that, listen, education funding has been a battle for decades. And he's right. And a lot of that change, some of that started to shift when we talk about state versus local property tax. What that means is local property tax is something that is collected by, from local property owners, and those go to your local school district. And that has shifted over time. It used to mostly a big portion of that came from local property owners. And then a sales tax came in. And when we're talking about state funding, that funding comes from what is referred to as the general fund. And the general fund is this big, huge pot of money that the legislature gets to determine how those funds are going to be split out among the different things that have to be paid for in order for a state to operate. And so just recently, Superintendent Debbie Critchfield announced some of the components in her requested budget for this next year. And she notes there is a notable markup for special education. But that request is to meet the growing demands of what it costs to operate special education programs in our local school districts. And her requested amount it's my understanding that it doesn't actually fill the entire gap. So what is happening on the state level is definitely impacting classrooms. So that's just an example of everyday funding for public policy for schools that are impacting us on the local level. Another one that I thought about was immigration and the workforce. And clearly, this is a hot topic right now nationally. And I think, if you're aware of immigration, there's just so many different perspectives on this one, and there's different feelings on this one. And one of the things that I have observed are like the challenge of, obtaining green cards, the challenge of just immigration in general, and from some of my lived experience, how local farmers bear a large burden when it comes to immigration. So I grew up on a local farm in Oregon, and we had my parents' farm had a lot of migrant workers because the work was seasonal. It was a holly farm, so they made wreaths, garland, centerpieces, and our farm depended it was dependent on migrant workers. And this farm was the largest employer in my county during a specific amount of time, like during a couple months of the year. And it was a value of employment for the community. And also, we there were different times because of different immigration policies that it was hard to get workers to be on the farm. And so I remember hearing about how the farm was working with different federal policies and bringing workers in from Mexico and what that meant for local farmers. And from what I understood and heard, the federal government put a large burden on the farm owners in achieving what they needed for employment at the farm. And that was just one, that's just like one way in which a local policy, I mean, a federal policy showed up on my local road going up and growing up, and what I saw and how that still plays out today. And I don't know the intricacies of all of those different immigration policies. It's something that I'm definitely curious about and I want to learn more. But that is for me, that is a personal anchor. Another way policy shows up is in city growth. And this is something that is definitely impacting Idaho in many different parts and especially in the Treasure Valley. Like who pays when your community expands and why local taxing authority matters. Just recently on the Ranch podcast, Matt had in the Meridian mayor and they were talking about how the mayor was sharing about how more growth has meant less property tax burden. And also, I know that Matt had speaker Mike Moyle on, I don't know if it was like a year ago. I mean, he comes on, Speaker Moyle, who is a House rep out of the Star area in Idaho. He came on and was talking on Matt's show at some point about House Bill 389. And this basically kind of centers around budget pressure in rapid growth areas. So cities like Nampa, Caldwell, Cuna, Star, and others in the Treasure Valley have relied on new developments, tax contribution to fund essential services like infrastructure, public safety, and schools. And because of different things that were happening, lawmakers went in and set an overall limit of, I think it was like 8% or something. And this limited the community's ability then to raise other fees and has impacted decisions that have had to, been made. And so it kind of, there was a cap and there were other choices. And now because of this new policy and this new law that was then implemented, there have been negative impacts. And as I even think about that one, my brain feels like it's a catch 22 when it comes to this is what was going on and the decision was made and now it's impacting this and kind of like this around and around thing. And more details are coming on that because it is something that someone has brought to my attention and I definitely want to look into. And again, it's an example of how policy shows up personally in our lives. The last one that I was thinking about just in terms of example is the kind of the political history in Idaho and how Idaho once swung between Republican and Democrat governors. And this happened a lot. I mean, I just went and looked it up. It was like, in the early 1900s all the way to the mid 1990s, there was a pretty good mix between Republican and Democrat governors. And then it was like in the mid to late 90s that really just shifted and became more Republican governors. And what does that mean for our local communities today? And part of it is a story about what it what politics used to mean in Idaho versus what they do today. And You might have heard people talking about, I'm a traditional, Idaho Republican versus, more modern and, far right conservative and what that means. And all of those different things then play out in different decisions that we see being made and policies that are impacting us. And also, I can appreciate that if it's not something that is in your every day, like you're seeing it or you're not, then it's something that isn't necessarily noticed. And that is, um, it's just it's interesting. And it's something that I have observed more and more as I've gotten older, and something that I, and it's something that I'm curious about. So it's something clearly that I pay attention to. So, one of the things that is so evident to me is how one of the things I've observed is that policy has changed over, like, because of the policies that we have, they are now being impacted by where we find ourselves today in 2025. And I'm going to get into, there's an episode that's coming about AI and education that's going to come out soon. Actually, there's a couple that are coming out soon. And this thing that I'm going to share about this personal flashback connects to decisions that are now needing to be made in regards to policy and the way that we practice education. So, okay, I am a nostalgic person. I grew up in the 80s, and those were like the stiff jean era. I hated wearing jeans as a kid. It was something that I would not do because it was so uncomfortable. I wore, okay, so who totally remembers stirrup pants? Like today I'm wearing leggings and they're tight and they stay down, but back in the day we did not have that type of material. So as a girl, I wore stirrup pants, and those are the things that were like, it was a piece of elastic that was attached to the bottom of the pant. And I loved stirrup pants. They were so comfortable. And I was also thinking about how in sixth grade, I can still see on the classroom wall in Mr. Davis's class the cursive alphabet that is along the top of that was along the top of the wall. And my my elementary school was the site for the movie Kindergarten Cop, and I'm in the movie. I was a first grader. There's a moment where I walk past Arnold Schwarzenegger. It's so fast, if you blink, for like, if you're not even like looking, you don't see me. It's like you see the top of my head. And it's this fun moment, and I shared it with my kids recently when I was in my hometown, and it was a it was a good time. So that's kind of the nostalgia that I grew up with, and I think that so many people have that nostalgia. It's like innate. It's a part of, I think, in some way, what keeps us connected to what what came before. And also, there is a major contrast from the 80s even to what I experience today. Meaning, in the 80s, there was no ultrasound to determine gender. That was just, you discovered the gender of the baby when the baby came out. And today, there's 3D ultrasounds. I mean, it blows my mind that you can see this 3D picture of your child's face. That I did not have access to that when I was having my babies. So that tells me that so much has changed because of, research, because of curiosity, because of opportunity, because of technology. So many of those components have changed to what we experience today. Even the beauty industry. I was having a conversation with my dermatologist the other day, and we were talking about anti-aging, and we were talking about, I mean, he, like, surgeries. I was like, have you seen so and so's face? And he had not. And I asked him to go look at her photo, because even 10 years ago, the type of anti-aging surgeries that are available today were not available 10 years ago. And it is mind blowing to me, like, just mind blowing. And the reality for me is that we're living in the future, and education is reflected in that. Our policies need to be reflected in that. And that is a challenge because of the nostalgia that we experience, because of the things that we actually experienced, because we know what worked for us because we lived that back in whatever decade we grew up in, and because we have this constitution from 250 years ago, nearly, and we are celebrating that this year in the United States. Have you heard of the book The Future You by Brian David Johnson? I read it over a year ago. I really enjoyed it. He's a futurist. Yes, that is a real thing. And companies, like big name, big, huge companies, use people like him and how they navigate moving forward as companies and progressing into the future. It's really cool. And one of the things that he says is, we are living in the future. And what that means is 5 years ago, we were thinking about today. 10 years ago, we were thinking about today. And so remembering that we are living in the future of 5, 10 years ago. And I know that might even sound like, okay, Alexis, but it was something that really just kind of it just struck me when I read it. And I thought, whoa, that's really true, because I have moments now as a mom or as a woman in my community where I think, I didn't see this. I didn't see this coming, or I did see this coming, and this was something I planned for. And now I'm living this thing that I planned for. I am truly living in the future. The future isn't something that's so far off in the distance. It's something that we are experiencing right now, too. And how does viewing it that way adjust the way that I see my world, or make choices in my world, or want to help with policy and practices in my world? And I know I often bring things back to education. It's kind of like my go to. But the fact is, change is constant, and policy is how we shape change to serve people. And that is important when we're looking at education, at immigration. We have to make policy that is going to serve us as people and serve us where we are right now. It would not make sense to make a policy regarding medicine that would be applicable in 1985. Policies need to be made so that we can adjust and live in 2025. And so that is also true. That is also true with education. So, okay, I'm talking about how policy is personal, and I'm also talking about why I feel that way, that origin story moment. And I want to share that origin story moment with you. So I'm setting the scene here. I'm in Lewiston, Idaho. That is 5 hours north of the Treasure Valley. If you've never been, I highly recommend taking that drive between Boise and Lewiston, and even going further north. You can take two different routes. You can go through McCall, or you can go up through Fruitland and Weiser. When I lived in Lewiston, I usually came down, and when I got to New Meadows, as I was going south, you could go right and go through like Cambridge, Weiser, Fruitland, or you could go left and go through McCall. My go-to was always turning right. I always turned right and went through Cambridge and Council and Weiser and Fruitland, and there's so many different towns you can go through there. So anyways, that is where Lewiston is. The drive between Boise and Lewiston is beautiful. It is, for me, like, you want to see a gorgeous part of Idaho, and you want to take like a long weekend, make the drive, especially in the spring and in the fall. It's gorgeous. I loved it. So anyways, the scene is, it's Lewiston. It's this large convention hall in a local hotel. And the school board has called a town hall portion during one of their board sessions. And they have to make a decision. And this is a crowded convention hall. There had to have been 300 people in this room. I am newish to the community. My family had been living in Lewiston for about 7 months, 7, 8 months. All of my kids were still in elementary school. My youngest was actually just a preschooler. And I found myself sitting there weighing in on a decision that the school board needed to make, which was, should the school district build a new high school or remodel the old one? And this was something that the school board had walked the community through. They had done major research on what it would cost to renovate the old high school or build a new high school. And, the community had linked arm in arm with the school board had linked arm in arm with the community to get this decision, that was in front of them now. They had learned with the community. So I had gone just to listen. I didn't know that many people. I had gotten involved in the PTA, the local parent group at my elementary school. Hadn't planned to speak, and I was listening to testimony for over an hour. And I'm sitting next to one of my kids' elementary school teachers. She was so kind. She came in and sat next to me, and we smiled and we're talking about a few different things. And while I'm listening to this testimony, I feel this pull to get up and say something, which kind of surprised me actually. I just had gone to listen and I felt this pull. And so I scribbled down a few notes and I took my turn and I stepped up to the microphone and I shared my family story, why we had moved to Lewiston, and why I believed that strong schools were central to a thriving, connected community. So, after nearly 2 hours of public testimony, the school board invited the community to leave if they didn't want to listen to the remainder of the board session. Nearly everyone, I mean, everyone's kind of like, okay, thanks. The board pauses for the moment while, if there are 300 people, 290 people leave. There's just 10 people that stay, and I am one of them. Because I was curious, what did a board session look like? And when it ended, a board member came up to me and said, you should run for the school board. And it was interesting because I thought there are no open seats, and it was something I had never considered. It was something I just hadn't considered. And to me, that is just an example of sometimes it's good for us to just drop ideas in people's laps for them to consider, or an invitation matters. And yeah, I was like, okay, yeah, sure. And it was the gentleman on the board. I later found out that it was the gentleman on the board who had just kind of, dropped that idea in my lap. He had been the member of the school board who had been against building a new high school. And I don't know if it was 1 or 2 sessions after that, 1 or 2 months after that, but he was the one that made the motion to build a new high school. So he had joined the board for the whole purpose of not wanting to vote to build a new high school. And through the learning process, his perspective had changed. And he changed his opinion and he actually supported building a new high school, which I thought was really cool. Anyways, so I have this moment at the school board meeting. And the next morning, I was surprised to see my remarks featured in the local newspaper. And 2 months later, a school board seat opened up. And it was that gentleman who had come up to me. He had actually resigned for health reasons. So it was something that he had kept private. And, we didn't know about it. I didn't know when he said, when he kind of dropped that idea. But what I felt like he was doing in that moment was saying, his actions, what it felt like was, I'm a guy on the school board. I've learned a lot. It's been this really great opportunity. And I want to let some people in my community know um, that I see who have the potential to care about the school board and this community. I want to just drop ideas like, hey, maybe consider running. It might be something. So, anyways, he was the one. So the seat's open, and people that I knew encouraged me to apply. Again, I felt that pull to apply. There were a couple of people that applied, and I was appointed. And as a young mom, I was really excited. And also, I was excited, I was nervous, and that was not something that I had ever anticipated. It wasn't something that I had sought out. I was like, whoa, what a cool opportunity. Maybe I'll throw my hat in the ring. And I was given the opportunity, and it was really cool. And that moment opened the door to a journey I never expected. And since then, I was able to get a master's from the University of Idaho. I was able to serve on the executive board of the Idaho School Boards Association. I was able to lead the Idaho PTA as state president. And now, then I was able to launch the Purple Zone podcast. And I'm currently pursuing a PhD at Boise State University. And for me, at the heart of it all, was really just a desire to speak up, not just for my own kids, but for kids at that time in my Lewiston community. And I have learned that leadership often starts with a single moment of courage. And I have been grateful for the people that I've met and for the work that I've been able to do. And so for me, in my origin story, like my takeaway is that leadership or working to create change or learning about something new about your community and getting involved often starts with one small act of courage. So, really, like, why does this matter? Well, policy, practice, and people, we are the people that are impacted by, like, we experience the practice that is impacted by the policy that is implemented on our local, state, and national level. And so often, one of the reasons that we get into this is because of something that happens to us, our origin story for whatever. I remember being in college and I was listening to a political science professor, and he shared about how there was a person who was experiencing something in his local community and he didn't like it. It was something about new housing development. And so he really dove in, this individual just dove in to try to really understand what was happening. And he went before his city council and he helped educate the people in his neighborhood, and they were able to make this positive change that they wanted. And it really, and my political science professor shared that it started from a moment of impact, something that this individual felt. And that was his origin story for getting involved. So, policies, decisions on funding, growth, or immigration, those do shape the world that we live in. And not this, yeah, they shape the big, huge United States, but they also shape your local town, your local neighborhood. And in terms of practice, communities have to wrestle with how to implement these policies on the ground. And passing a law or passing a policy, a law becomes a policy, is different than implementing a policy. And I know that we have definitely see that play out, particularly with the flag bill that just got passed this last session, and how passing that policy, passing that law, and talking with the different lawmakers and their intention of that bill, how that has looked different than implementing that bill. And for people, it's always personal because these are our kids, they're our schools, these are our livelihoods, these are our neighborhoods. And one of the things that I have learned in terms of being involved with parent groups, particularly the PTA, I've been involved with a lot of different parent groups over the United States. I think I have been in like almost every iteration of a parent group. Is that parent voices matter, particularly in education policy, because this is about our kids' future. They We're living in our future, and we have to think about the future that our kids are living in and what they're experiencing and how those policies that are being shaped today are going to impact them tomorrow. So the central question from today is, what is your origin story? When have you felt that pull to speak up, to show up, and to shape your community? Those moments, they might not be on a stage, but it really could be a conversation, a decision to volunteer, or a moment at your kid's school, or you're walking around your community at the local farmer's market, or you're walking down the street and you notice something in your community, there are it's for me, it's the reminder that policy is not distant. It's the air we breathe in community life. That like is just something that it just like that just sits with me. So change is happening every day, people, even if it doesn't feel like it when your alarm clock rings. And our origin stories remind us of why we care, why we show up, and why policy matters. Uh, just as a reference for conversations that that we have had together, just want to remind you that I have an episode recently released about Meta and the PTA and some of the different national headlines that have come from that. AA and education is a big one, and conversations are unfolding for that. I know I'm going to have a couple coming up because this is something that is happening right now in Idaho. And so more is coming from that. And I just want to say two different things to end this show. One, I'd love to hear your origin story. And two, thanks for listening to The Purple Zone. And that's a wrap for today's episode of The Purple Zone. Thanks for being here. If you liked what you heard, leave a review on your fave podcast app or on YouTube. And from me to you, the heart of The Purple Zone says community is where policy comes to life.